Hello, and welcome to History at Bedtime. The seven wonders of the ancient world were not just beautiful buildings. They were arguments made in stone, bronze, marble, gold, ivory, brick, water, and light. They were built by kingdoms and cities that wanted to prove something, that their gods were worthy of impossible houses, that their rulers could command labor and wealth on a scale few people had ever seen, that a city could survive a siege and turn the weapons of its enemies into a monument, that a harbor could announce itself from the horizon before a sailor had even seen land. Only one of them still stands. The Great Pyramid of Giza remains in the Egyptian desert, stripped of most of its white casing, but still massive enough to make the modern world feel temporary. The other six survive as fragments, foundations, disputed descriptions, underwater stones, reused marble, ancient testimony, and imagination. That loss is part of the power of the story. The Seven Wonders are not only a tour of ancient achievement, they are also a tour of disappearance. To understand them, we have to do more than repeat a famous list. We have to ask why these particular structures were remembered, what kind of societies could build them, what each one was trying to say, and why the ancient traveler who saw them felt that ordinary language was not enough. The Greeks used the word duma for wonder, not simple admiration, but astonishment, the shock of seeing something that forced the mind to widen its idea of what human beings could do. This is the real subject of the Seven Wonders. Not tourism, not trivia, not a checklist of monuments. The subject is ambition. Royal ambition, civic ambition, religious ambition, artistic ambition, technical ambition, and the human desire to leave something behind that time could not easily erase. We begin with the oldest, largest, and most stubborn of them all, the Great Pyramid of Giza. The Great Pyramid of Giza is the only one of the seven wonders still standing. Every other structure on this list is gone. Some of them comprehensively gone, leaving almost no physical trace. Others gone in the sense that they are ruins or foundations or fragments, present enough to be studied, but no longer able to produce the experience that earned them their place on the list. The Great Pyramid is different. It is there. It has been there for 4,500 years. It will almost certainly be there long after every other structure on Earth that human beings have built has crumbled or been deliberately demolished or been swallowed by rising seas. It was built for the pharaoh Khufu, called Cheops by the Greeks, around 2560 BCE, during the 4th dynasty of the Old Kingdom of ancient Egypt. For nearly 4,000 years after its completion, it was the tallest structure human beings had ever built. The Eiffel Tower was not constructed until more than 4,400 years after the pyramid was finished. The skyscrapers of Manhattan would not appear for more than 4,500 years. For the overwhelming majority of recorded human history, the Great Pyramid was the tallest thing that human hands had ever made, and it remained so until the 14th century of the Common Era. The numbers associated with it have a way of sliding past the mind without fully registering unless you stop and hold them deliberately. It contains approximately 2.3 million stone blocks. The average weight of each block is about 2.5 tons. The largest blocks, used in the internal chambers, weigh between 25 and 80 tons. The total weight of the structure has been estimated at approximately 6 million tons. The base covers an area of approximately 5.5 hectares, roughly the size of 10 city blocks in a dense modern city. The four sides are oriented to the cardinal directions of the compass with an accuracy that deviates from true north by a fraction of a degree. The base is level to within 2 centimeters across its entire extent. The corner angles are very nearly perfect right angles. This precision, maintained across a structure of this scale, without modern surveying instruments, remains one of the most impressive technical achievements in human history. What the ancient lists of wonders were responding to when they placed the pyramid first was not simply size, though size was undeniably part of it. They were responding to the experience of standing at its base and looking up. The Greek traveler who arrived at Giza after crossing the desert, who came from a world in which the largest stone buildings were the temples of the Greek islands and the city-states, who was accustomed to thinking of monumental architecture in terms of structures that a human eye could comprehend in a single glance. That traveler, confronted with the pyramid, found that the rules of visual comprehension simply did not apply. The structure was too large to see all at once from any useful distance. It occupied the sky and the ground simultaneously. It demanded a different kind of looking, a different kind of understanding. The interior of the pyramid, the descending passage, the subterranean chamber, the ascending passage, the grand gallery, the king's chamber, is as extraordinary in its own way as the exterior, though very differently. The grand gallery, approximately 47 meters long and nearly 9 meters high, with its corbelled walls leaning toward each other as they rise, creating a long ascending vault, is one of the most impressive architectural spaces in the ancient world and almost never appears in popular accounts. Standing at its lower end and looking upward along its length toward the king's chamber is to experience something that architecture rarely achieves: a sense of being inside a structure that is actively communicating something, that has been designed not merely to contain space, but to shape the experience of moving through it. The king's chamber, built entirely of red Aswan granite, walls, floor, ceiling, contains the empty sarcophagus of Khufu, lidless and unoccupied when the first modern investigators reached it in the 9th century CE. The chamber is precisely proportioned and precisely built, its 9 ceiling slabs of granite weighing between 25 and 40 tons each, still in place after 4,500 years. Above the ceiling, 5 additional chambers distribute the enormous weight of the pyramid overhead away from the ceiling surface, keeping it intact against a pressure that would have crushed a less sophisticated structural solution centuries ago. The engineering here is not visible from within the chamber, but it is the reason the chamber still exists, and it represents one of the most elegant structural solutions in the history of construction. The original casing of the pyramid, the smooth, polished white limestone that covered the entire exterior surface and gave it its gleaming appearance in the Egyptian sun, is almost entirely gone. The medieval builders of Cairo quarried it for their mosques and their city walls as convenient available stone, and the rough stepped surface that visitors see today is the exposed core that the casing once covered. Khufu's pyramid, the second of the 3 Great Pyramids at Giza, still retains a portion of its original casing near the apex, enough to understand what the complete surface looked like and how different the visual experience of the complete pyramid would have been from what we see now. The gleaming white pyramid visible from the Nile Valley, catching the Egyptian sun and reflecting it back across the desert, was a visual phenomenon that no photograph of the current ruin can adequately convey. The pyramid was not a wonder simply because it was large. It was a wonder because it was large and precise and beautiful and permanent, because it embodied in stone the absolute conviction of a civilization that the things it built were meant to last forever, and because, 4,500 years later, against all probability, they have. The question that often follows the pyramid is how it was built, and the honest answer is that we know a great deal more than the popular mystery industry usually admits, while still not knowing every detail. The pyramid was not built by an army of enslaved people dragged across the desert under whips, as older imagination liked to suppose. The evidence points instead to a large, organized labor force of Egyptian workers, including permanent skilled teams and rotating crews drawn from the population during parts of the year when agricultural work was less demanding. Their villages, bakeries, cemeteries, tools, and administrative marks have been studied around Giza, and what they reveal is not chaos but a state project of enormous discipline. The blocks were quarried, moved, counted, assigned, and set by people working inside a bureaucracy that could track labor, food, tools, transport, and timing with remarkable precision. Marks left by work gangs inside hidden relieving chambers above the king's chamber preserve names such as the Friends of Khufu and the Drunkards of Menkaure, rough human traces inside the most formal monument on Earth. Those names matter. They remind us that the pyramid was not built by abstraction. It was built by teams with identities, rivalries, humor, pride, fatigue, and skill. The real wonder of the pyramid is therefore not a supernatural secret. It is something more impressive: organization. A society had to feed thousands of workers, quarry millions of stones, transport granite from Aswan, maintain ramps and roads, align the structure with the sky, and coordinate the labor over years without iron tools, engines, cranes, or modern mathematics. The pyramid is not a puzzle because no one could have built it. It is a puzzle because people did build it, and because the system that made it possible was so competent that its result is still standing while almost everything around it is changed. For the Egyptians, the pyramid was not simply a tomb. It was part of a cosmic machine. The pharaoh was not just a political ruler, but a divine figure whose death required transformation, whose afterlife mattered to the order of the whole country. The pyramid's shape, rising from a square base to a single point, may have evoked the primeval mound of creation or the rays of the sun. Its placement at the edge of the desert, between the cultivated world of the living and the dry western land of the dead, gave it a meaning that was both religious and geographical. The building was meant to help the king pass from human life into an eternal cosmic role. That is why the pyramid feels different from a palace or a temple. It is not designed for daily use. It is not built to impress guests at a feast or defend a city against attack. It is a structure made for permanence, for the dead, for the gods, and for time itself. Most monuments try to survive history. The Great Pyramid seems to stand outside it. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon are, in a peculiar sense, the most mysterious of the seven wonders. They are mysterious because no one is certain they existed. No Babylonian text mentions them. No archaeological evidence of them has been identified in the excavations of ancient Babylon. The ancient descriptions of them, while consistent with each other in general outline, are all written by Greek and Roman authors who were themselves working from sources they did not personally inspect. The most detailed ancient description was written by the historian Berossus, a Babylonian priest writing in Greek in the 3rd century BCE, and it has survived only in quotations by later authors. The possibility that the Hanging Gardens were a real structure in a real city has been supplemented in recent scholarship by the suggestion that the ancient sources may have confused them with gardens in Nineveh, the Assyrian capital further north, where there is better textual evidence for elaborate royal gardens. But let us follow the ancient description and imagine what the Hanging Gardens were said to be. They were built, according to tradition, by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II, who ruled from approximately 605 to 562 BCE, and who was the monarch who destroyed Jerusalem and carried the Jewish population into the Babylonian captivity recorded in the Hebrew Bible. He built the gardens, the ancient sources say, for his wife Amytis, who was a Mede, from the mountainous, tree-covered landscape of what is now northwestern Iran, and who found the flat plains of Babylonia, however fertile, oppressively bare. She missed the green hills of her homeland, and Nebuchadnezzar, in an act of royal love that was also a demonstration of royal power, built her an artificial mountain. The gardens were not hanging in the sense of being suspended in the air. The word reflects a translation of a Greek term, kremistoi, that meant overhanging or terraced, suggesting gardens built on a series of elevated platforms, each one planted with trees and flowering plants. The whole structure rising in stepped terraces from the ground level to a height that some ancient sources place at approximately 75 meters. The structure was massive, built of mud brick, the primary building material of Mesopotamia, where stone was scarce, with a complex system of waterproofing that prevented the moisture from the gardens above from seeping through the structure below. Water was lifted from the Euphrates River to the top of the structure by some mechanical means. The ancient sources mention an Archimedes screw-like device, though this may be an anachronism, and then allowed to flow downward through the planted terraces, watering them as it descended. Imagine standing in the city of Babylon and looking toward this structure. Around you is the flat, dry plain of the Tigris-Euphrates Delta, unrelieved by any natural elevation, the horizon perfectly flat in every direction. And there, within the city, rises something that looks like a green hill, a stepped pyramid of living vegetation, trees growing on the upper levels visible above the city walls, the sound of running water audible from below, the smell of earth and leaves and flowers in a landscape where those smells were otherwise absent. The visual shock of this artificial landscape in its flat context would have been the primary experience of wonder, different in character from the overwhelming scale of the pyramid, but comparable in the quality of cognitive disruption it produced. The engineering required to maintain living gardens on elevated platforms in a dry climate was genuinely extraordinary. The waterproofing problem alone, how to prevent the moisture from the soil and the irrigation from dissolving the mud brick structure below, required solutions that are not fully understood from the ancient descriptions. Some scholars have proposed that the platforms were stone rather than brick, which would explain the lack of surviving remains if they were later demolished and the stone reused. Others have proposed that the gardens were on the roof terraces of the large palace complex that Nebuchadnezzar built, and that the ancient descriptions exaggerated the height. Whatever the specific structural solution, the combination of hydraulic engineering and horticulture at this scale and in this context represented a technical achievement that the ancient world found worthy of wonder. Babylon itself, at the height of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, was one of the largest and most impressive cities in the ancient world. The Ishtar Gate, the great ceremonial entrance to the city, covered with glazed blue bricks bearing images of lions, bulls, and dragons in brilliant color, has been partially reconstructed in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, and it gives a visceral sense of what Babylonian monumental architecture looked like in its original state. The processional way that led through the Ishtar Gate was lined with walls bearing more than 100 lion relief figures. The Ziggurat of Babylon, the great stepped temple tower that some scholars believe is the historical basis for the Tower of Babel story in the Bible, rose above the city in staged terraces. Babylon was a city that understood the use of architecture for political and religious statement, and the Hanging Gardens were the most extravagant expression of that understanding. Whether they existed precisely as described or not, the Hanging Gardens have exercised an enduring hold on the human imagination because they represent something that is genuinely appealing. The idea that the power and resources of a state could be directed toward creating, in a landscape that lacked it, a version of natural beauty. Not a temple or a monument or a fortification, but a garden. The idea that a king might build an artificial mountain covered in trees and flowers for his homesick wife is, of all the stories connected to the Seven Wonders, the most purely human in its motivation. The uncertainty surrounding the Hanging Gardens should not be treated as a weakness in the story. It is one of the reasons the story is fascinating. The other wonders can be placed with confidence. The pyramid at Giza, the temple at Ephesus, the sanctuary at Olympia, the tomb at Halicarnassus, the harbor of Rhodes, the island of Pharos at Alexandria. The gardens resist that confidence. They exist in the zone between history, memory, royal propaganda, and the Greek imagination of the East. If they were in Babylon, then they belonged to the city of Nebuchadnezzar, one of the great capitals of the ancient Near East, a city of walls, gates, temples, processions, and imperial power. If they were in Nineveh, as some modern scholars argue, then the ancient tradition may have misremembered or relocated an Assyrian achievement into the more famous name of Babylon. Either possibility tells us something important. Ancient memory was not a photograph. It was a living chain of description, admiration, exaggeration, translation, and repetition. The idea itself remains powerful because it joins two things that do not usually belong together: garden and empire. Gardens are intimate. They suggest shade, water, scent, care, and the slow work of cultivation. Empire suggests command, taxation, forced movement, conquest, and display. The Hanging Gardens, whether Babylonian or Assyrian, join them into one image, a landscape made artificial by power, nature recreated through engineering, a mountain built where no mountain existed. That is why the gardens deserve their place even under uncertainty. A wonder does not only astonish because it is physically measurable, it can astonish because the concept is unforgettable. A king reshapes a flat city into a living hill. Water rises against gravity. Trees grow above brick vaults. A woman from the mountains looks out over a foreign plain and sees, because power has made it so, a memory of home. The Temple of Artemis at Ephesus was, at the height of its development in the 4th century BCE, the largest temple in the ancient world. Ephesus was a wealthy Greek city on the western coast of Asia Minor, what is now Turkey, and the temple that stood there was not one building, but 3 successive ones built on the same sacred site, each more ambitious than the last, spanning a period of roughly 500 years of construction, destruction, and rebuilding. The first major temple at the site, built in the mid-7th century BCE, was already an impressive structure, one of the earliest large temples in the Greek world, built with stone columns rather than the wood that earlier Greek temples had used. This temple was destroyed around 550 BCE, probably by flooding, and rebuilt by the Lydian king Croesus, whose name became proverbial in the ancient world for extraordinary wealth, with contributions also coming from the Greek cities of Asia Minor and from various rulers and private individuals who recognized the temple's pan-Hellenic religious significance. This second great temple was what most of the ancient sources referred to when they described the wonder. It stood for roughly 200 years before being burned in 356 BCE by a man named Herostratus, who reportedly committed the act for the sole purpose of ensuring that his name would be remembered forever. The Ephesians, enraged, decreed that his name was never to be spoken, a decree that preserved his name perfectly, since reporting the decree required mentioning it. He succeeded, in the most ironic possible way, in his ambition. The night of the fire, according to the ancient tradition, was also the night on which Alexander the Great was born, and various ancient writers could not resist noting the coincidence that the goddess Artemis had been away from her temple because she was attending the birth of the future conqueror of the world. The third temple, rebuilt after the fire on the same sacred site, was the one that stood throughout the classical and early Hellenistic period and that most visitors to Ephesus in antiquity actually saw. It was enormous, approximately 130 meters long and 67 meters wide, with a double row of columns around its exterior, each column approximately 18 meters high, 127 columns in total. Some of the columns had sculpted relief figures on their lower drums, a distinctive feature of this temple that distinguished it from most Greek temples, where relief decoration was placed on friezes and pediments rather than on the columns themselves. The sculptural program included work attributed to some of the most famous sculptors of the period, including Scopas and Praxiteles. The cult statue of Artemis housed within the temple was not the idealized athletic goddess of later Greek tradition. It was much more ancient in form, a standing figure of a type called the Potnia Theron, or Mistress of Animals, adorned with multiple rows of what have been variously interpreted as breasts, eggs, or bull testicles, each interpretation carrying different theological implications. The antiquity of the cult was itself part of the temple's religious power. This was not a new deity, but one that had been worshipped on this site for centuries before the Greeks arrived, a goddess of ancient authority whose cult the Greeks had adopted and overlaid with their own religious framework. The economic life of Ephesus was closely connected to the temple. Pilgrims came from across the Greek world to make offerings, to seek oracular guidance, to participate in the great festivals of Artemis. The temple functioned as a bank, a repository of wealth deposited by individuals and states who trusted in the temple's inviolability as sacred ground. The silver industry of Ephesus, which produced small images of the goddess and her temple for sale to pilgrims, was one of the city's major economic activities. The craftsmen whose livelihood depended on this trade are specifically mentioned in the Acts of the Apostles in the Christian New Testament. When the Apostle Paul came to Ephesus preaching Christianity, the silversmiths rioted, fearing that his success in converting people would destroy their market for silver Artemis shrines. The temple was eventually destroyed by the Goths in 268 CE, and its ruins were robbed for building material over the subsequent centuries. Today, the site of the temple is occupied by a single reconstructed column standing in a marshy field outside the modern Turkish city of Selçuk. The column is made of fragments recovered from the site and assembled into a rough approximation of the original, barely suggestive of the 127 columns that once surrounded the sanctuary. The contrast between what was and what remains is more dramatic at Ephesus than at almost any other ancient site, and standing in that marshy field looking at the single reconstructed column, it requires real effort of imagination to conjure the ancient reality. The statue of Zeus at Olympia was created by the sculptor Phidias, the same sculptor who had created the cult statue of Athena Parthenos inside the Parthenon in Athens, and it was considered, by many ancient writers, to be the supreme example of Greek sculpture. Phidias made the statue sometime around 435 BCE, and it stood in the Temple of Zeus at Olympia for approximately 800 years before being removed to Constantinople in the 5th century CE and subsequently destroyed, probably by fire. The Temple of Zeus at Olympia was itself a major architectural achievement. One of the largest temples in mainland Greece, built in the Doric order, its sculptural program including some of the most important pedimental sculptures of the 5th century BCE, now preserved in the Olympia Museum. But the statue of Zeus that Phidias created for its interior transcended its architectural setting in the judgment of antiquity. The ancient sources describe it with an intensity of admiration that goes beyond conventional literary praise. The statue showed Zeus seated on a throne, which was itself an elaborate work of art in ivory, ebony, and precious metals, decorated with mythological scenes in carved relief. The god's head nearly touched the temple's ceiling, which led the ancient writer Strabo to note that if Zeus were to stand up, he would put his head through the roof. He was shown draped in a golden cloak, holding in his right hand a small figure of Nike, the goddess of victory, and in his left hand a scepter topped with an eagle. His face and hands and feet were of ivory. His drapery was of hammered gold. His eyes were probably of precious stones. The throne was decorated with images of the gods of Olympus and with figures of Nike dancing in relief and in the round. The technique Phidias used, chryselephantine, from the Greek words for gold and ivory, was the most expensive and most prestigious sculptural medium of the classical period. It produced figures of extraordinary visual richness, the warmth of the ivory skin contrasting with the cool gleam of the gold drapery, the precious stones of the eyes catching the light of the oil lamps that illuminated the interior of the temple. The effect was designed to be overwhelming, to produce the experience of genuine divine presence rather than simply the representation of it. The geographer Strabo, who saw the statue and wrote about it, observed that its effect was so powerful that visitors who entered the temple found that their grief and sorrow were lifted from them by the sight of it, that the genius of the sculptor had produced something that surpassed the power of ordinary perception and touched something deeper. The philosopher Epictetus, writing in the 1st century CE, used the experience of seeing the Zeus as a philosophical example, describing a man who traveled from the ends of the earth to see it and was satisfied, as if the sight itself was a form of completed desire, something for which no sequel was needed. The ancient accounts suggest that the statue was at the absolute limit of the space available to it, that Phidias had designed it to be as large as possible within the constraints of the temple's interior, creating the impression that if the god were to stand, he would break through the roof. This sense of barely contained divine scale, the divine power that the statue represented straining against the architectural limits that contained it, was deliberate, and it contributed to the experience of sacred awe that the ancient sources describe so consistently. The Temple of Zeus and its statue were the focal point of the Olympic Games, the great Pan-Hellenic athletic competition held every 4 years at Olympia that brought the Greek world together in a spirit of shared identity and temporary peace. Athletes who competed at Olympia were competing in the presence of Zeus as embodied in Phidias' statue, and the oath they swore before competing was sworn in its presence. The winners received their olive wreaths at its feet. The sanctuary of Olympia was among the most sacred places in the Greek world, and the statue of Zeus was the most sacred object within it, the visible presence of the king of the gods in his own house, made real by one of the greatest artists who ever lived. There was also a practical difficulty in maintaining such a statue that ancient visitors rarely thought about, because successful sacred art hides its maintenance. Ivory is not stone. It can dry, crack, and change with humidity. Gold sheets must be fitted, cleaned, repaired, and protected. Oil, lamps, smoke, dust, incense, and the breath of crowds all affect the interior of a temple. The statue of Zeus required care, and that care was itself a ritual act. The god's image had to be preserved because the god's presence, in the eyes of worshippers, had to remain visibly powerful. Phidias' workshop at Olympia, identified archaeologically, makes the wonder more human rather than less. The molds, tools, and the small cup bearing his name do something that the huge statue can no longer do. They bring us close to the working process. A masterpiece that later generations experienced as divine presence began in a workshop full of materials, assistants, experiments, measurements, mistakes, corrections, and the daily discipline of craft. The lost statue therefore survives in two different forms. It survives in ancient descriptions of awe, and it survives in the archaeological evidence of making. One tells us what people felt. The other tells us that what they felt was produced by hands, tools, skill, and time. That combination is at the heart of every wonder on the list. The gods may have been the subject, but human craft was the medium through which the gods became visible. The Mausoleum at Halicarnassus was the tomb of Mausolus, the satrap, effectively the governor, of Curia, a region in southwestern Asia Minor, who died in 353 BCE. His wife and sister Artemisia. The combination of roles was not unusual in certain ancient traditions, completed the monument after his death, working from plans that appear to have been developed during Mausolus's own lifetime. He was not a Greek, though he governed a region with a large Greek population and was deeply engaged with Greek culture. He was a Carian, from a tradition that merged Greek and non-Greek elements. And his tomb was an architectural expression of exactly that cultural hybridity. The monument was so remarkable that it gave the world a new word, mausoleum, now used for any large tomb. The specific structure at Halicarnassus, the original mausoleum, was the first to bear the name, which was simply a Latin rendering of its occupant's name. Every large tomb built since that incorporates a Greek columnar structure above a base and below a roof, which is an enormous number of them across the past 2,500 years, is in some sense derived from or inspired by Mausoleus's tomb. The structure was approximately 45 meters tall and organized in 3 main zones. The lower portion was a rectangular base of white marble, rising in steps from the ground. Above the base stood a colonnade of 36 Ionic columns, surrounding a central burial chamber. Above the colonnade rose a stepped pyramid of 24 steps, narrowing to a platform on which stood a quadriga, a chariot drawn by 4 horses, of colossal scale, the whole thing topped by a statue of Mausoleus and Artemisia riding in the chariot. The sculptural program that decorated the entire monument was created by 4 of the most famous sculptors of the 4th century BCE, Scopas, Leocares, Bryaxis, and Timotheus, each responsible for one side of the structure. Fragments of this sculptural program have survived and are displayed in the British Museum, and they show work of extraordinary quality and energy. The combination of architectural elements from different traditions was itself part of the monument's significance. The high podium was derived from non-Greek, particularly Lycian and Near Eastern, tomb traditions. The Greek colonnade above it drew on the most sophisticated architectural vocabulary of the classical world. The pyramid roof referenced Egyptian monumental architecture. The whole thing was topped by a characteristically Greek sculptural program of narrative friezes and freestanding figures. The mausoleum was a deliberate synthesis of the Mediterranean world's architectural traditions, a monument that announced its occupant's authority by drawing on the fullest possible range of cultural prestige. The site of Halicarnassus is now the Turkish city of Bodrum, a popular tourist destination on the Aegean coast. The mausoleum was damaged by earthquakes and then robbed for building material by the Knights Hospitaller, who used its marble to construct the castle that still dominates the harbor, the Castle of St. Peter, now called Bodrum Castle. The polished white marble of the mausoleum became the walls of a medieval fortification. Some of the sculptural fragments that the knights incorporated into the castle walls have been identified and preserved. Others were burned for lime. The original site is now an archaeological park with modest foundations and a small museum. The scale of the original monument visible only in the traces of its footprint in the ground. Artemisia herself, who oversaw the monument's construction, died before it was completed, according to the ancient sources. She had, according to the same sources, mixed her husband's ashes with water and drunk them, a form of grief so extreme that it became legendary in antiquity as the example of a wife's devotion. The monument she built him became the standard against which subsequent royal tombs were measured for centuries. The mausoleum also forces us to think about what a tomb is supposed to do. Every tomb is built because the body cannot remain in the world in the same way the living do. But a royal tomb tries to solve a larger problem. How can power continue to speak after the ruler is silent? The answer at Halicarnassus was to make the tomb itself a political biography. The high base said authority. The columns said Greek culture. The pyramid roof said ancient grandeur. The chariot group at the top said victory and motion. Mausolus was dead, but the structure presented him as still elevated, still visible, still riding above the city. This is why the word mausoleum survived when the man himself became obscure. Most people who use the word today do not know who Mausolus was. That is a kind of historical irony, but also a kind of success. His name detached from his biography and became a category. The tomb did what tombs dream of doing. It made the dead man impossible to remove completely from language. The survival of fragments in the British Museum and of stones reused in Bodrum Castle gives the mausoleum a second life as material migration. Marble carved for a 4th century BCE dynast became the wall of a medieval crusader fortress. Sculptures designed for royal memory became archaeological evidence. The monument disappeared as a whole, but its parts entered other histories. That is often how the ancient world survives, not intact, but repurposed. The Colossus of Rhodes was a bronze statue of the sun god Helios that stood at the entrance to the harbor of the island of Rhodes in the Aegean Sea. It was built to commemorate Rhodes's successful resistance to a siege by the forces of Demetrius Poliorcetes, one of the successor generals of Alexander the Great, in 305 to 304 BCE. The defenders of Rhodes melted down the bronze siege equipment that Demetrius had abandoned when he withdrew, and used it to cast the statue. The statue was built by a sculptor named Chares of Lindos, a student of the great sculptor Lysippus, and it took 12 years to complete, being finished around 280 BCE. It stood approximately 32 to 36 meters tall, roughly equivalent to the modern Statue of Liberty without its pedestal. It represented the sun god Helios standing with his right hand raised to shade his eyes, looking out to sea, or possibly with both arms at his sides, the precise pose being uncertain. It stood for approximately 54 years before being destroyed by an earthquake in 226 BCE, which toppled it at the knees. The fallen statue lay on the ground at Rhodes for nearly 900 years. The Rhodians had been told by an oracle not to rebuild it, and they obeyed. So visitors to Rhodes for those 900 years could look at the ruins of the Colossus lying where it had fallen, still impressive even in fragments. The Arab geographer Muawiyah I finally sold the bronze for scrap in 654 CE, reportedly to a Jewish merchant who needed 250 camels to carry it away. The most famous image associated with the Colossus, the image of it straddling the harbor entrance, with ships sailing between its legs, is almost certainly fictional. The ancient sources do not describe the statue as straddling the harbor, and the engineering required to build a 30-meter bronze figure in that position would have been beyond anything achievable in the 3rd century BCE. The straddling image appears in the Renaissance period and has no reliable ancient authority behind it. The actual position of the statue was almost certainly on solid ground near the harbor, upright and commanding, but not straddling. What the Colossus represented to the ancient world was the combination of scale and technical achievement. A bronze figure of this size, cast hollow, built up from the feet over the 12 years of construction, requiring an internal structure of iron bars and stone to support the weight of the bronze, was an engineering accomplishment without precedent. No bronze statue of this scale had been attempted before, and none of comparable scale was attempted again in antiquity. The resources of the island of Rhodes, one of the wealthiest trading centers of the Hellenistic Mediterranean, had been directed entirely toward the monument, and the result was something that visitors from across the ancient world came specifically to see. The loss of the Colossus is perhaps the most complete of all the losses among the 7 wonders. Of the others, we have at least foundations, fragments, or surviving examples of the artistic traditions they represented. Of the Colossus, we have nothing, no fragment identified, no confirmed image, only the descriptions in ancient texts and the Renaissance imagination that turned those descriptions into the famous straddling image that is still the first thing most people think of when they hear the name. The bronze that was the Colossus is gone entirely, melted down, turned into other objects, dispersed into the material flow of the ancient economy. The city of Rhodes still exists. The harbor it stands on is still beautiful, The medieval city built by the Knights Hospitaller within its ancient walls, a remarkable survival in its own right. Somewhere near the harbor, the Colossus once stood and looked out over the Aegean. The sun that Helios represented still rises over that same harbor every morning, turning the water from dark to light in the same way it did when the statue stood. The god is still there, in the sense that the light is still there. The statue is gone. Rhodes was a fitting place for such a monument because Rhodes itself was built on maritime intelligence. The island sat in a strategic position between the Aegean and the Eastern Mediterranean, and its prosperity came from trade, naval skill, diplomacy, and the ability to remain useful to larger powers without being swallowed by them. Its famous maritime law influenced later traditions because merchants trusted Rhodian practice. The city understood ships, contracts, harbors, winds, and the fragile politics of commercial survival. The Colossus, therefore, was not only a statue of Helios. It was Rhodes speaking about itself. It said that the city had endured a siege, mastered bronze, honored its god, and turned danger into memory. The fact that the statue fell after only 54 years did not end its power. In some ways, the fallen Colossus became even more famous because it lay on the ground like the body of a defeated giant, giving later travelers a second kind of wonder, not the wonder of vertical triumph, but the wonder of ruin on a colossal scale. There is something honest in that. Human ambition often falls. Monuments crack, knees break, bronze collapses, and the earth moves beneath the most confident works. The Rhodians did not rebuild it because an oracle told them not to, but the refusal to rebuild also gave the fallen statue its own authority. It became a monument to vulnerability as much as victory. Even the greatest image of a sun god could be brought down by the earth. The Lighthouse of Alexandria, the Pharos, named after the island on which it stood, was built during the reign of Ptolemy II in the early 3rd century BCE and was one of the tallest human-made structures in the ancient world, usually estimated by modern scholars at roughly 100 to 120 meters, though ancient and medieval reports sometimes gave larger figures. It served as a functional lighthouse, guiding ships into the harbor of Alexandria, the greatest city and greatest port of the Hellenistic world, for approximately 1,500 years before being seriously damaged by earthquakes in the 13th and 14th centuries CE. The architect was a man named Sostratus of Cnidus, and he reportedly wanted to inscribe his own name on the lighthouse, which was dedicated to the Ptolemaic rulers. He is said to have arranged a clever compromise. He inscribed his own name in the stone and then plastered over it, dedicating the lighthouse to the savior gods on the plaster. When the plaster eventually fell away, his own name was revealed. The story may be apocryphal. It appears in a 2nd century CE source, but it captures something about the desire of the craftsmen and architects of antiquity to be remembered alongside the rulers who commissioned their work. The lighthouse was built in 3 stages or zones stacked upon each other. The lowest section was square in plan, its exterior walls possibly faced with white marble, rising to a height of approximately 56 meters. The middle section was octagonal, rising to approximately 27 meters. The upper section was circular, housing the lantern that served as the actual light, approximately 9 meters in height. The total height of the structure, including the statue at its top, either Poseidon, the god of the sea, or Helios, the sun god, was the figure that ancient sources estimated at between 150 and 180 meters. The light itself was produced by a fire burning in the lantern room, its intensity amplified by a system of bronze mirrors that reflected it out to sea. The ancient sources disagree about the exact mechanism and the range at which the light was visible, with some claiming it could be seen from distances of 50 kilometers or more, which is probably exaggerated but not impossible given the flat sea horizon and the extraordinary height of the structure. The light was not simply a warning beacon. It was a demonstration of the technological capacity of Ptolemaic Alexandria, a statement that this city possessed knowledge and engineering skill that the rest of the Mediterranean world could not match. Inside the lighthouse, a ramp or staircase allowed the firekeepers to reach the lantern level, and there were apparently rooms within the structure for various functions. The ancient sources mention a windlass for raising fuel to the upper levels, and some texts describe rooms within the structure where observers could look out over the sea. The structure was in some ways a building as much as a monument, inhabited and functional over the 15 centuries of its operation. The Pharos was damaged by earthquakes in 956, 1303, and 1323 CE, and its upper stages fell progressively until what remained was a stub of the original structure. The Sultan Qaitbay of Egypt built a fortress on the same island in 1480 CE, using the materials of the fallen lighthouse, including stones that may have been original Pharos fabric, as building material. The citadel of Qaitbay still stands at the end of the peninsula in Alexandria, a medieval castle on the site of the ancient wonder. Underwater archaeological investigations in the harbor of Alexandria have found blocks and objects that may have been part of the original lighthouse, including a sphinx and colossal statues that could have decorated its base, now lying in the shallow water of the eastern harbor. Alexandria itself had been the greatest intellectual city in the ancient world for several centuries before the lighthouse was built, and the Pharos served in some ways as the symbol of the city's ambition, a structure that declared to every ship approaching from the open sea that this was a place of extraordinary human achievement, that the city behind the lighthouse had built the library, had produced the greatest scientists and mathematicians of the age, had connected the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean through its trading networks, and was willing to build a monument to its own power that could be seen from the horizon. The lighthouse was a kind of advertising, but advertising for something real. The actual grandeur of Ptolemaic Alexandria was among the grandest creations of the Hellenistic world, and the lighthouse announced that grandeur before any other part of the city came into view. It was the last of the seven wonders to be destroyed, and its destruction was the slowest, a gradual diminishment over centuries rather than a sudden catastrophe. In this, it resembles the civilization it served. Alexandria did not simply collapse, but declined through a long series of diminishments, remaining always remarkable even as it became progressively less than it had been. The Pharos also changed the relationship between technology and trust. A sailor approaching the Egyptian coast faced a dangerous problem. The low, flat line of the Nile Delta could be difficult to read from the sea, and the approaches to Alexandria required guidance. The lighthouse reduced uncertainty. Its fire was not only spectacular, it was useful. It turned knowledge into safety. It told sailors where they were, where the harbor lay, and where the city intended them to enter. That practical function made the Pharos one of the most modern of the ancient wonders. It was not built only to honor a god, bury a ruler, or commemorate victory. It was infrastructure raised to the level of monument. Modern bridges, airports, towers, ports, and observatories belong to the same family of ambition. Useful structures made so boldly that utility becomes symbolic. The Pharos declared that Alexandria was not merely a city with a harbor. It was a city that could command the sea with geometry, stone, fire, mirrors, and maintenance. For centuries, generations of workers climbed inside it, carried fuel upward, tended the flame, cleaned the reflective surfaces, watched the weather, and kept the signal alive. A wonder often looks singular from a distance, as if it exists by itself. But the Pharos depended on repetition. Every night the fire had to be lit. Every day the structure had to be watched. Its greatness was not only in the day it was finished. Its greatness was in the 1500 years during which it continued to do its work. Taken together, the Seven Wonders span nearly 2,000 years of ancient building, from the Great Pyramid, completed around 2560 BCE, to the Colossus, finished around 280 BCE. They span 3 continents in the ancient geographical understanding: Africa, Asia, and Europe, if we accept Herodotus's tripartite division of the known world. They include works in stone and bronze and gold and ivory and marble and mud brick. They include a tomb and temples and a lighthouse and a statue and a garden and a pyramid. They were built for gods and for kings and for the dead and for the living, for religious purposes and political ones, to commemorate victories and express grief and demonstrate power and honor the divine. What they share, the thing that earned them all a place on the same list, is the quality of the Ummah, of astonishment. Each of them, in its specific context, exceeded what the people who encountered it thought was possible. Each of them produced, in the travelers and pilgrims and merchants and soldiers who saw them, a moment of suspended ordinary judgment, a moment in which the usual categories of comparison and assessment simply did not apply, in which the only adequate response was the recognition that something genuinely extraordinary had been made. The list of 7 wonders has been extended and revised many times in the subsequent history of civilization. The medieval world had its own list of 7 wonders, including structures like the Colosseum in Rome and the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. The modern world has produced its own lists. In 2007, an internet poll selected a new list of 7 wonders of the modern world, including the Great Wall of China, the Taj Mahal, Machu Picchu, the Colosseum, Chichen Itza, the Christ the Redeemer statue in Rio de Janeiro, and the Petra Rock City in Jordan. These lists reflect the different cultural moments that produced them, the different geographies of wonder available to different civilizations at different times. But the original list retains its hold on the imagination, partly because of its antiquity and partly because the structures it includes are genuinely extraordinary, and partly because only one of them survives, which means that to think about the others is to practice a particular kind of historical imagination, the imagination of loss. The attempt to recover through careful thought and careful reading what the physical experience of encountering these structures would have been like. That imagination is not without value. The attempt to understand what was lost, to reconstruct in the mind what no longer exists in the world, is one of the ways in which history connects the present to the past, and one of the ways in which the past makes demands on the present. The 7 wonders make a demand. They ask us to think about what extraordinary human achievement looks like, what it costs, what it means, and what it leaves behind when the physical structure is gone. What it leaves behind, it turns out, is stories. The Hanging Gardens may never have existed, or may have existed differently from how they were described. But the story of Nebuchadnezzar building a mountain of trees for his homesick wife is in the world now and will not leave it. The Colossus is gone so completely that we cannot be sure what it looked like, but the idea of a city celebrating its own survival by casting its enemies' abandoned weapons into a monument 100 feet tall, that idea persists and resonates. The lighthouse is a stub of foundations under a medieval castle, but the image of a fire burning 300 feet above the sea, guiding ships into the greatest port in the ancient world, is as vivid tonight as it was when the fire burned. The 7 wonders also teach a harsher lesson. Greatness does not guarantee survival. Some were destroyed by earthquakes, some by fire, some by war, some by neglect. Some were dismantled because later people needed stone more than memory. The ancient world did not preserve its masterpieces for our benefit. It used them, repaired them, robbed them, worshipped in them, lived around them, and eventually replaced them when circumstances changed. This is why the loss of the wonders feels different from ordinary ruin. They were not small mistakes of history. They were the best things their builders could make, and most of them still vanished. That fact should make us cautious about our own monuments. No building is protected by admiration alone. No achievement is exempt from weather, politics, religion, economics, conquest, and the long impatience of time. And yet disappearance is not the same as failure. The Temple of Artemis is gone, but it changed what a temple could mean. The Mausoleum is gone, but its name still names monumental tombs. The Colossus is gone, but the idea of a vast civic statue returned in other forms, from Renaissance drawings to modern liberty monuments. The Pharos is gone, but the word pharos became a word for lighthouse in languages shaped by Mediterranean memory. A wonder can survive by influence even when its material body is lost. The only one we can still visit, the only one that still makes its original demand on the human senses, is the Great Pyramid. It has been there for 4,500 years. It will outlast everything else that human beings have built in the long years since it was finished. Standing at its base, looking up at the rough stepped core that remains when the gleaming casing is stripped away, the experience of Vyuma, of astonishment at what human beings can do when they commit themselves entirely to making something extraordinary, is still available, still intact, still waiting. The other 6 are gone. But the wonder they created, the understanding that human beings are capable of exceeding what any reasonable expectation would allow, that somewhere in the capacity of the species is a potential for achievement that ordinarily goes unrealized, that understanding is not gone. It is as present as the pyramid, as present as the stories we still tell about the structures that have not survived, as present as the list itself, which has been copied and discussed and debated and extended for 2,500 years, because the questions it poses: what is the most extraordinary thing human beings have ever built? What does it cost to make something genuinely great? What does it mean when it is gone? Are questions that no generation has been willing to stop asking. Tonight, in whatever quiet place you have found, those questions are as alive as they have ever been. The pyramid is still standing. The other 6 are still remembered. The wonder is intact. The process by which the list of 7 wonders became canonical is itself an interesting piece of cultural history that illuminates how the ancient world thought about excellence and achievement. The earliest references to a list of the most notable structures in the world appear in Greek texts from the 3rd century BCE. The period when Greek culture had expanded through Alexander's conquests across an enormous area of the known world, creating a class of educated Greek-speaking travelers and tourists who moved through this expanded world with the leisure and resources to visit its notable places. The first person to compile a systematic list appears to have been Antipater of Sidon, a Greek poet of the late 2nd century BCE, whose poem describing 7 remarkable structures survives in the Greek anthology. His list differs slightly from the canonical one. It includes the walls of Babylon rather than the Lighthouse of Alexandria, for instance, which tells us that the specific 7 were not immediately fixed but represented a selection from a longer list of remarkable places. Other Greek and Roman writers produced their own versions, and the specific 7 that became canonical emerged from this tradition of comparison and revision rather than from a single authoritative decision. The number 7 carried symbolic weight in ancient Mediterranean cultures. It was associated with completeness, with the 7 visible planets, with various theological and philosophical systems that organized the world in groups of 7. A list of 7 wonders was not simply an enumeration of 7 remarkable things, but a claim to comprehensiveness, a statement that these 7 exhausted the category of the genuinely extraordinary. Whether or not this claim was literally accurate, the symbolic authority of the number 7 gave the list a weight that a list of 6 or 8 would not have had. The geographical range of the canonical list reflects the Greek-speaking world at its widest reach, from Babylon in the east, which Alexander's conquests had brought within the Greek cultural orbit, to Greece itself in the west. The list does not include anything from Rome, which was, at the time most versions of the list were being compiled, not yet the dominant power in the Mediterranean, nor anything from the Celtic world, the Indian subcontinent, or China, whose remarkable achievements in architecture and engineering were simply not within the frame of reference of the Greek travelers who compiled the list. The list is a Greek list, reflecting a Greek experience of the world, and its canonical status reflects the subsequent dominance of the Greek intellectual tradition in Western culture. The ancient travelers who visited these structures were not simply tourists in the modern sense. Travel in the ancient world was dangerous, expensive, and slow, and the decision to undertake a significant journey to see a remarkable structure was a serious commitment of resources and time. Those who made such journeys tended to record their experiences in letters, in memoirs, in geographical texts, and these records, however fragmentary and imprecise, are the primary sources for what the wonders actually looked like. Reading them requires patience and critical attention, since ancient descriptive prose tended toward the rhetorical rather than the precise, and the numbers given for dimensions and distances are often unreliable. But they also contain passages of genuine observation, moments when the writer clearly abandons the conventional formulas of admiration and tries to communicate something specific about the experience of actually being in the presence of something extraordinary. The Temple of Artemis at Ephesus generated some of the most enthusiastic ancient descriptions of any of the wonders, perhaps because its scale was immediately comprehensible to visitors who were familiar with Greek temples. Unlike the pyramid, which exceeded all existing categories of comparison, or the Mausoleum, which combined architectural traditions in a way that required some interpretive effort, the Temple of Artemis was recognizable as a Greek temple, just larger and richer and more elaborately sculptured than any other Greek temple in existence. The experience of visiting it was therefore not simply one of incomprehension in the face of the overwhelming, but one of recognition pushed to an extreme. The visitors saw what a Greek temple was, and this temple showed what a Greek temple could be when every available resource was directed toward making it as magnificent as possible. The relationship between the Temple of Artemis and Artemis herself, the goddess who was worshipped there, is worth considering carefully. Artemis was one of the most widely worshipped goddesses in the Greek world, associated with hunting, with the moon, with the wilderness and the transition from girlhood to womanhood, with childbirth, and with healing. Her temple at Ephesus was the primary center of her cult in the Hellenistic world, attracting pilgrims from across the Greek-speaking world and beyond. The pilgrims who came to Ephesus were not coming to admire architecture. They were coming to stand in the presence of the divine, to make offerings to a goddess in whom they genuinely believed, to seek her protection or her healing or her blessing, to fulfill vows they had made in moments of danger or difficulty. The architectural achievement of the temple was therefore inseparable from its religious function. The scale and the beauty were not separate from the worship. They were expressions of it, the physical manifestation of the community's understanding of what Artemis deserved. A goddess of Artemis's power and importance deserved the most magnificent house that human beings could build for her. The donors who contributed to the construction of the temple, Croesus, the Lydian king, being the most famous, were making a statement about the relationship between human wealth and divine favor, expressing their piety through the commitment of resources that was the most concrete form of devotion available to them. The cult statue at Ephesus, the ancient, non-Greek image of the goddess adorned with multiple rows of what the ancient sources describe variously as breasts or eggs, was considered by the Ephesians to be a gift from the gods rather than a human creation. The tradition was that it had fallen from the sky, which placed it in a different category from anything made by human hands, however skilled. The contrast between this ancient, divinely given cult image and the sophisticated Greek artistic traditions visible in the temple's sculptural program was itself theologically significant. The ancient, primitive power of the goddess embodied in an archaic image, housed in a structure that represented the highest achievement of human artistic and technical skill. The statue of Zeus at Olympia raises similar questions about the relationship between artistic achievement and religious experience, but in a more direct way. Phidias's creation was explicitly a product of human artistic genius. Everyone who saw it knew it had been made by a specific sculptor working in a specific technique in a specific period. And yet the ancient sources describe the experience of seeing it in terms that go beyond aesthetic admiration into something more like religious encounter. The statue produced theuma, astonishment, not simply because it was technically impressive, but because Phidias had somehow managed to create, through the arrangement of ivory and gold and the specific expression he gave the figure, something that felt like the genuine presence of the divine rather than a human representation of it. This was the highest aspiration of ancient religious art, not to represent the divine, but to make it present, to create a physical object that was genuinely inhabited by divine power rather than merely pointing toward it. The Egyptians understood the cult statue in exactly these terms. The daily rituals of feeding and clothing and anointing the divine statue were performed on the assumption that the god actually inhabited the statue, actually received the offerings, was actually present in the temple. The Greek tradition was more philosophically ambiguous about exactly what the relationship was between the statue and the god it represented, but the functional aspiration was similar: to create something through which the divine could be encountered rather than merely imagined. Phidias achieved something in the Zeus that most artists never achieved. He made people feel that the divine was actually present. The ancient testimony is so consistent on this point that it is hard to dismiss as mere rhetorical convention. People came from great distances specifically to have the experience of seeing this statue, and they reported that the experience exceeded their expectations, that it produced something beyond ordinary aesthetic pleasure, something closer to the encounter with genuine presence. Whatever we make of the theological dimensions of this experience, as a description of what great art can do at its most powerful, it remains recognizable across the centuries. The Mausoleum at Halicarnassus is in some ways the most politically interesting of the Seven Wonders, because its commission reflects a specific moment in the history of the Hellenistic world, the period in which Greek culture was being adopted by non-Greek rulers throughout the Eastern Mediterranean as a vehicle for political legitimacy. Mausolus was not Greek, but he governed a region with a large Greek population, and he understood that Greek cultural forms carried prestige that was politically useful. His tomb was designed to impress a Greek audience while also drawing on the architectural traditions of his own non-Greek background, and the result was a structure that could not have been produced by a purely Greek patron or a purely non-Greek one. It required the specific cultural hybridity that Mausolus represented. This kind of cultural hybridity, the creative synthesis that occurs when one tradition encounters another and is changed by the encounter, is one of the most consistent drivers of artistic and architectural innovation in human history, and the Mausoleum is one of its clearest ancient examples. The combination of the high Lycian podium, the Greek columnar order, the Egyptian pyramid roof, and the Pan-Hellenic sculptural program was not simply an eclectic assemblage, but a synthesis that created something new, a tomb type that then became the model for monumental funerary architecture across the Hellenistic and Roman worlds. The very word we use for any large tomb comes from this synthesis. The Lighthouse at Alexandria was different in character from all the others on the list in being primarily functional rather than primarily religious, political, or commemorative. Its purpose was practical, to guide ships safely into the harbor of Alexandria, and it achieved this purpose through technical means rather than through religious power or royal display, though it was also an expression of royal power and certainly a source of wonder to all who saw it. The combination of practical function and extraordinary scale that the lighthouse represented was itself a kind of wonder. The idea that something built to serve a mundane navigational purpose could also be one of the most extraordinary structures in the world. The Ptolemaic rulers who built the lighthouse understood that the two functions were not in tension. The grandeur of the structure announced the grandeur of the city it served, which announced the grandeur of the dynasty that governed it. The lighthouse was the first thing visible to a ship approaching Alexandria from the open sea. 150 meters of stone rising above the flat delta landscape, the fire at its top burning day and night, the reflected light visible from 50 or more kilometers away. Every merchant who approached Alexandria with goods from Syria or Italy or Spain saw the lighthouse first, and the lighthouse communicated, before any word was spoken, that the city behind it was serious about its claims to greatness. The ancient world also understood the lighthouse as a scientific achievement, as evidence that human beings could apply the principles of optics to solve a practical problem on a very large scale. The mirror system that amplified the light of the fire and directed it out to sea was a practical application of the understanding of reflection that Greek mathematicians had been developing, and it represents an early example of what we would now call applied science, the translation of theoretical understanding into useful technology. The Ptolemaic court that funded the lighthouse also funded the museum and the library, and the connection between scientific research and technological application that the Pharos represented was understood by its builders as part of a coherent intellectual program. Looking at the seven structures together, what strikes the contemporary observer most strongly may be the range of the ambitions they express. The pyramid expressed the ambition of eternal life, of building something so permanent that the order it represented, the divine kingship of the pharaoh, would be fixed in stone beyond the reach of time. The Hanging Gardens expressed the ambition of transformation, of using human power to change the landscape itself, to create green life in a dry plain, to give a homesick queen the mountains she missed. The Temple of Artemis expressed the ambition of divine honor, of building for the goddess something so magnificent that it would communicate the community's understanding of her greatness. The statue of Zeus expressed the ambition of divine presence, of making the god genuinely present in human space through the power of artistic creation. The Mausoleum expressed the ambition of memorial, of making a man's name and greatness permanent in stone that would outlast his body and his dynasty. The Colossus expressed the ambition of celebration, of turning the materials of war into a monument to survival and civic pride. The Lighthouse expressed the ambition of service, of building something extraordinary in the service of a practical human need. These are not different ambitions. They are variations on the same fundamental human impulse, the desire to make something that exceeds the ordinary, that declares that human beings are capable of more than their everyday lives suggest, that leaves a mark on the world that time cannot easily erase. All seven of the wonders were expressions of this impulse, however different their specific contexts and purposes. The impulse itself has never disappeared. It is visible in every cathedral that medieval builders pushed to the limit of what stone could do, in every Renaissance palace that tried to equal the splendors of ancient Rome, in every modern skyscraper that competes to be the tallest building in the world, in every bridge that spans a gap that engineers once said could not be bridged, in every scientific experiment that reaches for knowledge that the previous generation thought unreachable. The seven wonders were ancient expressions of something permanent in human nature, the refusal to accept the given as sufficient The insistence that what is possible exceeds what has been done, the commitment to excellence that is not a comfortable aspiration but a demanding one. The structures are mostly gone. The impulse that created them is not. 6 of the 7 wonders were built, flourished, and were destroyed within a span of approximately 1,800 years. The 7th, the Great Pyramid, preceded them all and has outlasted them all, and will almost certainly continue to outlast whatever the future brings. Standing at its base tonight in the imagination, as you rest, the sense it gives is not of loss, but of permanence. The permanence of a human decision, made 4,500 years ago, to build something that would last forever, combined with the extraordinary luck of a dry desert climate and a stone that is harder than time. The other 6 are present in a different way, in the stories told about them, in the words written by people who saw them and tried to communicate what they had seen, in the fact that their names are still known and their purposes still understood and their extraordinary ambitions still legible across the centuries. The lost wonders are present in the loss itself, which is a kind of presence. The space where something extraordinary once was is not simply empty. It is charged with the memory of what was there. The lists we make of the most extraordinary things human beings have achieved are one of the ways we have of affirming the aspiration, of saying that we believe excellence is real, that it is possible to exceed the ordinary in ways that matter, that the effort is worth making. The 7 wonders of the ancient world were one version of this affirmation, made by people who had seen enough of the ancient world to know what extraordinary looked like, and who wanted to preserve the memory of it for people who had not had the chance to see it themselves. We are among those people, living 2,500 years after the last of the original wonders was built, most of them inaccessible to us not just by geography, but by time. The list preserves what the structures themselves cannot preserve, the experience of encountering them, the recognition of excellence they produced, the specific quality of human achievement they represented. Tonight, in the quiet, these 7 places exist in the imagination with whatever clarity the ancient descriptions and the modern scholarship can give them. Imperfect, partial, but present. The pyramid in its desert. The gardens above the Babylonian plain. The forest of columns at Ephesus. The gold and ivory god at Olympia. The wedding cake tomb at Halicarnassus. The bronze giant by the harbor at Rhodes. The fire burning 300 feet above the sea at the edge of Alexandria. They are gone. They are not gone. Both things are true at once, in the way that the past is always gone and always present, always lost and always recoverable, always over and always available to the imagination that reaches for it. The fire at the top of the lighthouse is still burning if you are willing to see it. The craftsmen and architects who built the 7 wonders are, in most cases, barely known to us. Their names occasionally preserved in a single ancient source, their biographies otherwise entirely lost. The exceptions are significant. Phidias, who made the statue of Zeus and the Athena Parthenos in the Parthenon, was famous enough in antiquity that ancient writers debated which of his works was the greater achievement, and his name has survived continuously in the historical record. Sostratus of Cnidus, who designed the lighthouse, is known primarily from the story of his inscription. Chares of Lindos, who built the Colossus, is known almost entirely because of the Colossus. The 4 sculptors who decorated the Mausoleum, Scopas, Leocares, Bryaxis, Timotheus, are known from fragments of their other works and from the pieces of the Mausoleum that survived to be incorporated into the walls of the knight's castle and later identified and studied. The anonymity of most ancient craftsmen and architects is itself a significant historical fact. The ancient world generally did not preserve the names of those who executed great projects. Only, sometimes, those who designed them. and usually only those who achieved a level of recognition that led to their names being copied by enough scribes that at least one copy survived the centuries. The workers who quarried and transported and set the millions of blocks of the pyramid, the craftsmen who cast and chased the bronze of the Colossus, the stonecutters who fitted the columns of the Temple of Artemis, the workers who carried water to the terraces of the Hanging Gardens. These people are entirely anonymous. Their labor was the substance of the wonders, and their names are gone. This anonymity does not diminish them. The quality of work they produce speaks for them more clearly than any biographical record could. The fitting of the casing stones of the Great Pyramid, stones that in some areas are in contact with each other with gaps measurable in fractions of a millimeter, required a level of craft skill that any professional stonecutter of any era would recognize and respect. The hollow casting of the Colossus in bronze, the gradual, enormously difficult process of building up the interior armature and casting the exterior bronze sections over 12 years, required metalworking knowledge and skill that is not exceeded by anything produced in the 2,000 years since. The sculptural relief on the column drums of the Temple of Artemis, fragments of which are in the British Museum, shows a mastery of marble carving that very few works of any period can match. These skills were not discovered or invented by the projects that required them. They were accumulated over generations of practice, transmitted through apprenticeship and workshop tradition, refined through countless small commissions before they were called upon to serve something extraordinary. The Great Pyramid was built by a civilization that had been developing stoneworking skills for centuries before Khufu came to the throne. The Colossus was built by sculptors working in a bronze tradition that had been developing in the Greek world since the Archaic period. The statue of Zeus drew on chryselephantine techniques that Phidias had developed in his work on the Athena Parthenos in Athens. The extraordinary achievements of the Seven Wonders were built on the accumulated craft knowledge of entire traditions, and they represent the moment when those traditions were asked to exceed themselves. The materials used in the Seven Wonders tell their own story about the resources and the priorities of the civilizations that built them. The pyramid was built primarily of limestone quarried locally, with granite for the internal chambers quarried at Aswan hundreds of miles to the south and floated down the Nile on barges. The investment in stone, rather than the mud brick that was cheaper and more available in Egypt, was a deliberate choice, a statement that what was being built was meant to last far beyond what mud brick could provide. The white Tura limestone casing that originally covered the pyramid was a specifically chosen material, harder and more polishable than the local stone, capable of producing the gleaming white surface that made the pyramid a visual landmark from enormous distances. The statue of Zeus used gold and ivory, the most expensive combination of materials available to the ancient Greek world. Gold was always the most precious metal, its price reflecting both its rarity and its permanence. Gold does not tarnish or corrode, which gave it an association with the divine and the eternal that no other material possessed. Ivory was the most expensive organic material available, requiring the trade networks that brought elephant ivory from Africa through the eastern Mediterranean to Greece. The decision to build the Zeus in this technique, rather than in the bronze or marble that most large Greek sculptures used, was a deliberate escalation of cost and prestige, a statement that this statue deserved materials beyond those available to ordinary commissioners. The bronze of the Colossus came, as already noted, from the siege equipment that Demetrius had abandoned after his failed siege of Rhodes. This origin was not simply a convenient source of material. It was a statement of victory and transformation. The machines that had been built to destroy Rhodes became the monument that celebrated its survival. The tools of war were transmuted into art. The specific material history of the Colossus was inseparable from its meaning, and the Rhodians understood this. The statue was not simply made of bronze, It was made of the particular bronze that their enemies had brought, which they had refused to let destroy them. The marble of the Mausoleum and the Temple of Artemis came from the famous marble quarries of Asia Minor, the same geological formations that produced the high-quality white marble that Greek sculptors and architects had been using since the Archaic period. This marble, pure, fine-grained, capable of being carved to extraordinary precision and polished to a gleaming white surface, was the essential material of classical Greek monumental building, and the two wonders built in Asia Minor naturally drew on its local availability. The quality of the marble was itself a statement of quality. Any educated Greek observer would recognize the material and understand what it communicated about the seriousness of the commission. The modern rediscovery and study of the Seven Wonders has been one of the more interesting projects in the history of classical scholarship. The excavation of the site of the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus in the 1860s by the British archaeologist John Turtlewood, who spent 11 years searching for it before finding the pavement of the temple floor nearly 6 meters below the surface, is one of the great archaeological detective stories of the 19th century. Wood searched systematically through the available ancient sources for clues about the temple's location, conducted extensive excavations in and around the modern town, and found the temple almost entirely by accident when his workmen hit the ancient pavement while excavating a drainage channel. The fragments he recovered, including the sculptured column drums now in the British Museum, gave scholars their first direct physical evidence of the temple's character. The excavation of Halicarnassus, now Bodrum, has recovered fragments of the mausoleum that have been carefully studied and partially reassembled in the British Museum, where the mausoleum room contains some of the most impressive large-scale Greek sculpture outside Greece. The friezes showing the battle between the Greeks and the Amazons, one of the standard mythological subjects of classical sculptural programs, used here with particular appropriateness given the tomb's location in a region that myth associated with the Amazons, are remarkable for their technical quality and their physical energy. The horses and riders of the chariot group, some of which survived relatively intact, show the sculptors at the highest level of their ability. The underwater investigations in the harbor of Alexandria, conducted since the 1990s by a team led by the French archaeologist Frank Gaudio, have mapped a significant portion of the ancient royal quarter of the city that now lies beneath the waters of the eastern harbor. Among the objects found and studied underwater are colossal statues that once decorated the entrance to the Ptolemaic royal palace complex and possibly the lighthouse itself, sphinxes and obelisks and portrait statues of a scale consistent with Ptolemaic monumental architecture. These objects have been photographed and mapped in situ, and some have been raised for conservation. They do not directly tell us what the lighthouse looked like, but they give a vivid sense of the visual character of Ptolemaic Alexandria and the scale at which its rulers thought and built. The site of ancient Babylon in modern Iraq was extensively excavated by German archaeologists in the early 20th century, and the reconstruction of the Ishtar Gate, the great ceremonial entrance to the city built by Nebuchadnezzar, in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, is the most dramatic surviving example of Babylonian monumental architecture. The gate, with its brilliant blue glazed brick surface bearing images of lions, bulls, and dragons in vivid relief, gives a direct physical sense of what Babylonian royal building looked like. The use of color, the scale, the imagery of divine protection and royal power. The processional way that led through the gate was lined for several hundred meters with similar decorated walls, creating a corridor of royal display through which formal processions would pass. No evidence of the Hanging Gardens has been identified in the Babylon excavations, which does not necessarily mean they did not exist. It means either that they were not built there, or that the evidence has not survived, or that it has not yet been found. The alternative theory, that the gardens described by ancient sources were actually the gardens of Nineveh, the Assyrian capital further north, and were attributed to Babylon through a confusion in the ancient sources, has been developed in some detail by the British Assyriologist Stephanie Daly, who has identified Assyrian textual references to elaborate royal gardens and water-lifting devices that match some of the specific details in the ancient descriptions of the Hanging Gardens. This theory has not achieved universal acceptance among scholars, but it represents a serious attempt to reconcile the absence of Babylonian evidence with the specificity of the ancient descriptions. The Olympias site, where the Temple of Zeus stood, has been excavated extensively since the 19th century, and the museum at Olympia contains some of the most important Greek sculpture in existence, including the sculptures from the pediments of the Temple of Zeus, which represent the transition from the severe style of early 5th century sculpture to the classical style of the Parthenon period. These sculptures tell us nothing directly about what the chryselephantine Zeus looked like, but they tell us about the sculptural tradition within which Phidias was working, and they give a sense of the visual environment of the sanctuary in which the statue stood. The workshop in which Phidias created the statue of Zeus at Olympia has been identified archaeologically, a building near the Temple of Zeus that contained tools, molds, and materials consistent with chryselephantine sculpture. Among the finds was a cup bearing the inscription in Greek that translates, "As I belong to Phidias," a small personal object that connects the abstract name in the ancient sources to a specific physical place and a specific person who worked in it. The discovery is not dramatic, but it has a particular quality of directness, a craftsman's cup, found in a craftsman's workshop, bearing the craftsman's name, connecting the modern observer to the person who made one of the most celebrated works of art in history. The tradition of seeking out and describing remarkable structures has never ended. Every era produces its own lists of the most extraordinary things human beings have built, and every era finds different criteria for what makes something worthy of wonder. The ancient list weighted scale, craft, and the expenditure of extraordinary resources in the service of divine honor or royal commemoration. Medieval lists emphasized religious architecture, the great cathedrals, the pilgrimage shrines. Modern lists tend to weigh scale and engineering achievement alongside cultural significance, and they include structures from a genuinely global range rather than the Greek-centered range of the ancient list. But the underlying aspiration is the same in every era and on every list: to identify the places where human beings exceeded themselves, where the gap between what was possible and what was attempted was small enough to be closed, where the result justified the effort in a way that ordinary ambition cannot. The Seven Wonders of the ancient world are the most famous version of this aspiration, the most ancient surviving instance of the human impulse to make a list of the most extraordinary things and to argue about which belong on it and which do not. The argument is still going on. New structures are built every decade that challenge the existing category of the extraordinary. Old structures are rediscovered or reappraised and found to deserve a place on the list that they have not previously been given. The wonders of the ancient world are joined by the wonders of every subsequent era, each adding to the accumulated record of what human beings are capable of when they commit themselves fully to making something that exceeds the ordinary. In the imagination, the Great Pyramid is lit by moonlight, or by starlight, or by the glow of the Cairo metropolitan area visible even in the desert. Its surface is rough where the casing stones are gone, and the shadows between the courses catch the light in ways that change as the angle of illumination changes. The other six are present only in the imagination, but the imagination is not nothing. The imagination is how the past is kept alive when the physical structures are gone, and the past does not entirely disappear as long as there are people willing to think carefully about it. The Seven Wonders. One still standing. 6 present in the world only as stories and descriptions and fragments and the space they once occupied. All 7, the standing one and the lost ones together, among the greatest things human beings have ever made. We come, finally, to the end of the ancient list, 7 structures that asked the ancient world to measure the outer edge of human ambition. We have stood at the base of the Great Pyramid and looked up at 4,500 years of stone. We have tried to imagine the green terraced gardens rising above the flat plain of Babylon. We have walked between the columns of the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus and looked up at the carved relief at their bases. We have stood in the dim interior of the Temple of Zeus at Olympia and felt the presence of Phidias's great statue filling the space. We have looked at the Mausoleum at Halicarnassus rising in its 3 zones against the Aegean sky. We have stood at the harbor of Rhodes and tried to imagine the Colossus that once stood there. We have looked out from a ship approaching Alexandria and seen the fire of the Pharos burning above the sea. 5 of them are gone entirely. 1 is ruins. 1 is still there. The one that is still there was built by people who believed that what they were building would last forever. They were right. To imagine the 7 wonders properly, it helps to imagine the ancient traveler who might have tried to see them. Such a traveler would not have bought a ticket, boarded a plane, and crossed continents in hours. He would have moved by ship when the season allowed, by road when roads were safe, by river when the current and the wind cooperated. He would have depended on letters of introduction, local guides, money changers, interpreters, harbor officials, innkeepers, and the fragile goodwill of strangers. Travel was slow enough that anticipation became part of the experience. By the time a traveler reached Giza, Ephesus, Olympia, Rhodes, or Alexandria, he had already spent weeks or months hearing stories about what he was about to see. That matters because wonder is partly prepared by expectation. A man who had heard of the pyramid since childhood and then finally stood in its shadow did not encounter it as a neutral object. He encountered it as a legend made visible. A pilgrim who had heard that the statue of Zeus could make grief lift from the heart entered the temple, already waiting for an experience. A merchant approaching Alexandria from the open sea saw the Pharos not only as a navigational aid, but as confirmation that he had arrived at the most intellectually and commercially ambitious city in the Mediterranean. The structures themselves were physical, but their reputation traveled ahead of them like another form of architecture. The ancient world had no photography, no printed guidebooks in the modern sense, and no reliable visual archive available to ordinary people. Description had to do the work that images now do. A traveler who saw a wonder and then described it to people at home became part of the monument's survival. He carried the wonder in language. He exaggerated perhaps, misunderstood perhaps, confused measurements perhaps, but he also preserved the emotional fact that the structure had overwhelmed him. The 7 wonders survived first as experiences, then as descriptions of experiences, then as lists, then as cultural memory. The chain is fragile, but it held. There is also a political edge to all 7 structures that should not be softened. Wonders are never innocent. They require surplus wealth, concentrated authority, technical specialists, and the ability to direct labor toward purposes beyond immediate survival. That can be beautiful, but it can also be brutal. The pyramid required the central power of the Egyptian state. The Hanging Gardens, if Babylonian, belonged to an imperial capital built on conquest. The Temple of Artemis depended on the wealth of a great sanctuary and the offerings of generations. The Mausoleum turned dynastic power into stone. The Colossus celebrated survival from siege, but also advertised civic prestige in a competitive Hellenistic world. The Pharos served sailors, but it also announced Ptolemaic control over one of the richest ports on earth. This is why the 7 wonders are more interesting than a simple celebration of greatness. They ask the same difficult question again and again. What is the relationship between beauty and power? The answer is never simple. Power can create beauty by gathering resources that no private person could gather. It can also force people to serve projects they did not choose. Beauty can outlive the violence or inequality that helped make it possible, but it does not erase them. A serious history of the wonders has to hold both truths at once. These structures were extraordinary achievements, and they were built inside systems of power that modern observers should not romanticize. The wonders also reveal the difference between building for use and building for meaning. A house is useful because people live in it. A wall is useful because it protects. A harbor is useful because ships enter and leave. But a wonder exceeds use. Even the Pharos, the most practical of the seven, was built larger and more symbolically than pure utility required. The excess is the point. A wonder announces that human beings are not satisfied with function alone. We take useful forms and load them with meaning until they become statements about who we are, what we fear, what we worship, and how badly we want to be remembered. The relationship between the wonders and death is especially strong. The pyramid is a tomb. The mausoleum is a tomb. The statue of Zeus was made for a god who ruled over mortal lives. The Temple of Artemis was connected to fertility, childbirth, and protection at the dangerous edge between life and death. The Colossus was made from the instruments of a siege that could have destroyed a city. The Pharos saved lives at sea by marking a path through danger. Even the Hanging Gardens, in the gentlest version of the story, respond to homesickness, absence, and the ache of being separated from the world that formed you. That gives the seven wonders their emotional depth. They are not merely monuments to confidence. They are monuments against fragility. Pharaohs die, dynasties collapse, cities burn, ships wreck, earthquakes strike, invaders dismantle what they cannot understand, and time turns polished marble into scattered stone. The wonders were built in a world that knew all of this. Their ambition was not naive. It was defiant. If we move through them in order of survival rather than chronology, the Great Pyramid becomes the anchor. It tells us what permanence can look like when geography, material, state power, and religious conviction align. The Temple of Artemis tells us how a sacred place can be rebuilt after disaster and remain central to a city's identity for centuries. The Statue of Zeus tells us what happens when art is asked to produce the feeling of divine presence. The Mausoleum tells us how grief and politics can create a new architectural language. The Colossus tells us how a city can transform military trauma into civic pride. The Lighthouse tells us how science and utility can become sublime. The Hanging Gardens tell us that sometimes the most durable wonder is the one whose physical existence is least certain because the story is too powerful to die. Each wonder therefore occupies a different place in the human imagination. The pyramid is endurance. The gardens are desire. Artemis is devotion. Zeus is presence. The mausoleum is memory. The Colossus is resilience. The Pharos is guidance. Put together, they form something like a map of ancient ambition, not a geographical map, but a map of the ways civilizations try to reach beyond ordinary life. The materials of the wonders also form a kind of ancient vocabulary. Stone says permanence. Gold says divinity. Ivory says precious life. Bronze says victory and technical mastery. Glazed brick says color, surface, and royal display. Water says control over nature. Fire says warning, knowledge, and survival. Marble says refinement, proportion, and status. When ancient builders chose these materials, they were choosing meanings as much as substances. The viewer understood the language even before he understood the engineering. Modern viewers often approach ancient monuments through ruins, and ruins can deceive us. A ruin is quieter than the thing it used to be. It has lost color, movement, smoke, smell, crowd, ritual, music, money, fear, and the pressure of living belief. The Temple of Artemis in ruins is a column in a field. The Temple of Artemis alive was noise, incense, money, sacrifice, argument, craftsmanship, prayer, and sunlight on marble. The Pharos in ruins is stone beneath a fortress and blocks beneath water. The Pharos alive was fire in the night and sailors steering towards safety. The difference matters. To make these wonders interesting again, we have to restore the human activity around them. The pyramid had quarrymen, bakers, scribes, priests, surveyors, rope makers, water carriers, and crews competing for honor. The gardens, if they existed, had gardeners, engineers, water lifters, brickmakers, and people who understood how roots behaved in elevated soil. Artemis had pilgrims, bankers, silversmiths, priestesses, city officials, and anxious families bringing offerings. Zeus had athletes, trainers, judges, priests, sculptors, and spectators who had walked for days to stand in the sanctuary. The Mausoleum had mourners, sculptors, stonecutters, dynastic administrators, and a queen trying to turn grief into permanence. The Colossus had foundry workers, sailors, civic officials, and veterans of a siege. The Pharos had firekeepers, harbor pilots, merchants, and sailors watching for its light. Once those people are restored to the picture, the wonders stop being static objects and become living systems. They were not simply built and then admired. They were used, maintained, visited, interpreted, argued about, feared, praised, repaired, and eventually lost. That is what makes them historical rather than merely decorative. A wonder is not only a thing. It is a relationship between a thing and the people who need it to mean something. There is a final reason the seven wonders still hold attention. They make the ancient world feel both alien and familiar. Alien, because the religious assumptions, political systems, and social hierarchies that produce them are not ours. Familiar, because the impulse behind them has not changed. We still build towers to announce wealth. We still build museums to preserve memory. We still build bridges and observatories and monuments that are larger than practical necessity. We still argue over which achievements deserve to be called wonders. We still want lists. We still want to know what the greatest things are. The original list survives because it satisfies that desire while also frustrating it. It gives us 7 names, but not 7 intact experiences. It gives us the pyramid, and then it gives us loss. It asks us to admire what remains and imagine what does not. That combination, certainty and absence, stone and story, is more powerful than a perfect archive would be. There is another detail worth keeping in view. The 7 wonders were not evenly distributed across ordinary human life. Most people in antiquity never saw any of them. A farmer in inland Anatolia, a shepherd in the Greek mountains, a worker in the Nile Valley, a woman managing a household in a small town, a soldier posted far from the great routes of trade. For them, the wonders existed as rumor, not as sight. Their fame depended on inequality of movement. The people who made the lists were literate, mobile, and connected to the elite world of Greek education. That does not make the list false, but it reminds us that every canon is made by someone, from somewhere, with a particular range of vision. That particular range of vision explains both the power and the limits of the ancient list. The Greeks who preserved it knew Egypt, the Aegean, Asia Minor, Babylon, Rhodes, Olympia, and Alexandria. They did not know the Great Wall of China in any direct way. They did not know the monuments of the Americas. They did not think in global categories because their world was not global in the modern sense. The 7 wonders are therefore not the 7 greatest structures ever built by every civilization on Earth. They are the 7 greatest structures remembered by a particular ancient Mediterranean tradition. That distinction does not weaken them. It makes them more precise. They show us the ancient Mediterranean looking at itself and at the neighboring civilizations it admired, feared, conquered, studied, and misunderstood. Egypt appears on the list because the Greeks were astonished by its age and scale. Babylon appears because Mesopotamian royal power had entered Greek imagination as something vast and exotic. Asia Minor appears because Greek and non-Greek traditions were deeply entangled there. Rhodes and Alexandria appear because Hellenistic cities were now making their own claims to greatness. The list is a map of cultural contact. It is also a map of changing power. The Great Pyramid came from the Old Kingdom of Egypt, a world unimaginably older than the Greek writers who later admired it. The Hanging Gardens, if Babylonian, belonged to the Great Imperial Age of Mesopotamia. The Temple of Artemis and the Statue of Zeus belonged to the Greek sacred world. The Mausoleum and the Colossus belonged to the Hellenistic age after Alexander, when Greek culture and Near Eastern monarchy blended into new forms. The Lighthouse belonged to Ptolemaic Alexandria, where Greek science, Egyptian wealth, and Mediterranean trade met in one city. In 7 structures, the list compresses 2 millennia of political change. This compression is one reason the subject works so well as history. It allows us to move from pharaohs to Babylonian kings, from Greek sanctuaries to Hellenistic dynasts, from siege warfare to maritime technology, from tombs to temples to lighthouses. Each wonder opens a door into a different civilization, and together they show that ancient history was never one thing. It was not only Greece, not only Egypt, not only Rome, not only the Bible, not only myth. It was a web of cities, kingdoms, languages, craftsmen, merchants, priests, engineers, artists, sailors, and rulers borrowing from each other, competing with each other, and trying to make their own version of greatness visible. That is why the 7 wonders should not be treated as a children's list of famous monuments. They are a serious subject. Behind each one is a question about power, memory, labor, religion, technology, and the human appetite for permanence. Behind each one is a society saying something about itself. And behind the loss of 6 of them is the deeper historical truth that even the loudest statements made by a civilization can become silence if later generations stop listening. The most interesting thing about the 7 wonders is not that ancient people admired them. It is that we still understand why. We no longer share their religious assumptions. We no longer live under pharaohs, satraps, priestly treasuries, Hellenistic dynasties, or city-states that cast gods in bronze. But we still recognize the gesture. We still know what it means when a society takes its wealth, its science, its labor, its art, its fear of death, its pride, and its hunger for permanence, and concentrates all of it into one object. That object says, "Remember us." It says, "We were here." It says, "Our gods mattered, our dead mattered, our victory mattered, our city mattered, our knowledge mattered." It says, against time, that human beings can make something larger than the practical needs of a day. Most of those objects failed to survive, but the command to remember them worked. That is the final wonder. Not the pyramid alone, not the gardens, not the temple, not the god, not the tomb, not the bronze giant, not the lighthouse. The final wonder is that a list made by ancient travelers still carries 7 vanished or half-vanished places into the minds of people who will never see them. 1 still stands in Egypt. 6 survive by memory, scholarship, fragments, and imagination. Together, they remain one of the clearest statements the ancient world ever made about the scale of human ambition. Sleep well. Good night.